Hello. Okay, here's your last section of notes for this week, hopefully. We are on 1.3 in the note packet, so you should have done 1.1, 1.2, with the 1.1 homework, the 1.2 homework. You should have started on the supplemental worksheets. You may not have gotten to the last one because that covers this material. So yeah. Okay, so we are going to start with midpoint. So we're talking about midpoint and distance formula in this guy. So midpoint is a point that divides or splits a segment into two equal parts. That's the important part. Remember, so we have a segment. If I have a midpoint, it splits this guy and this guy into equal parts. So I'm going to put a little tick mark to say that this guy is equal in length to this guy, or they are now two congruent segments because it's a midpoint. Segment bisector is a point, line, ray, segment, or plane that contains the given segment's midpoint. So let's say I have a segment. We know that this point is a bisector, so we have a segment bisector. Maybe that bisector ends up being a ray. Or maybe that segment ends up being a line. The bisector, I mean, ends up being the line. Or maybe that's really a plane. Or maybe it's just a point. But it's something that's going to bisect this segment, okay? So it's something that goes through the midpoint on the segment. Midpoint formula, it's kind of like averaging grades. So if you wanted to find your direct middle of your grades, let's say I had a 90% on one test and an 80% on one test, right? You would add them together and divide by 2, okay? And it would give you an 85 if you added those and divide by 2. Same thing here. You're going to add your x's and divide by 2, but we're also going to add our y's and divide by 2. Okay? So that will give you midpoint on a coordinate grid. Otherwise, if you're just trying to find midpoint and this is at 8 and this is at 12, well, we know that's at 10, but one way to find that mathematically is to do 8 plus 12, which is equal to 20, and then divide that by 2 because you're finding the average of it, so that would give you 10. Okay? The second formula we're going to talk about in this section is a formula that you are going to you need to memorize both of these, but you really need to memorize distance formula because we're going to use it a lot. It is big square root, in parentheses, x minus x squared plus y minus y squared. Now, a lot of times you'll see like x2 minus x1, y2 minus y1. What they mean by that is if I'm on a coordinate grid and I have 2 points and I want to find the distance between those 2 points, this is my first point, so we call that the first x and the first y. This is my second point, so we call that x2 or my second x and my second y. It doesn't necessarily have to be your second x minus your first x. It could be your first x minus your second x, but here's the thing. However you set it up here, so if you use your first x first, you have to use your first y first here. Okay? If you use your second x first here, you have to use your second y here first. And actually, Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's Pythagorean. Pythagorean theorem is another way to find distance. And from what I understand, you guys may not have gotten into Pythagorean theorem last year, but we will get into it this year. You're supposed to cover it, I think, at the end of algebra. Someone can let me know on a meeting at some point whether you guys got into that or not. Okay, calculate the midpoint and distance of each of the segments. So this one gives me points. So we're going to do midpoint first. So I'm going to add my x's, so -5 plus 7 divided by 2. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my y's. I'm going to add my y's, 5 plus 3, and divide by 2. Putting parentheses around it because it's going to turn into a point. It's going to turn into an xy point. So -5 plus 7 is positive 2. 2 divided by 2 gives me 1. 5 plus 3 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. That is the midpoint of that segment. Now, if I wanted to find distance of that segment, we're going to plug into distance formula. So big square root y2, so x2, my second x, 7, minus my first x, which is a negative 5, that whole thing squared, plus my second y, which is 3, minus my first y, which is 5, that whole thing squared. Here, two negatives make a positive. 7 plus 5 is 12. 12 squared is 144. Plus 3 minus 5 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared gives me a positive 4 because a negative times a negative. Be careful when you enter that in your calculator. If you're doing that and not in your head but in your calculator, put parentheses around the negative 2 so it gives you the correct answer. That is square root of 148. We're going to learn how to reduce radicals, but we have not done that yet. So I'm going to do second square root 148 on my handy dandy little calculator. And I'm going to round this to the nearest tenth, so that would be 12.2. It's actually 12.16, but that 6 rounds that 1 up to a 2. Tenth is 1 decimal place. All right, we're going to do the same thing on this guy. I want for you to pause me, try to find the midpoint and try to find the distance, and then unpause me. Okay, so here are my answers. I got 3, 1.5, or 3 halves. Same thing, right? For the midpoint, added my x, divide by 2, add my y's, divide by 2. For distance, I want to talk about something. I chose to do 4 minus 2, and since I did 4 minus 2, I had to do 4 minus a negative 1. You may have done that backwards. You may have done 2 minus 4, a negative 1 minus 4. You will get the same answer in the end if you do the mathematics correct, because that would give you a negative 2. Negative 2 squared is a positive 4. And this part would give you a negative 5, and negative 5 squared is a positive 25. So rounded to the nearest tenth is 5.4. Okay, on the back, it says, use the given endpoint R and midpoint M of RS to calculate the coordinates of point S. So we're going to draw a picture because remember how important pictures are. Endpoint R, midpoint M, endpoint S. Okay? So this is at negative 3, negative 2. This is at negative 1, negative 8. We have to find the x and y here. Okay? So we're still doing midpoint. So we are going to do our x plus our x divide by 2 and y plus y divide by 2. But in this situation, we have our first x, which is negative 3, plus we do not know what our second x is of the endpoint. So I'm just going to put x. I'm going to say divide by 2. But we do know what the value is of x at that midpoint. We know it's equal to negative 1. I'm going to do something similar for my y's. My y endpoint of negative 2 plus my other y endpoint is just y here. That whole thing divided by 2 should give me my y midpoint, which is negative 8. And so now you're just doing an algebraic equation. You're solving for this. So you're wanting to get x by itself. So if I'm just looking at the x one, I multiply by 2 on both sides, so I get negative 3 plus x equals negative 2, because I multiplied by negative 2. I'm going to add 3, so x equals 1. Okay? Over here, multiply by 2, negative 2 plus y equals negative 16. Get y by itself, so I add 2 to both sides, and I get y equals negative 14. Now I know the midpoint is at, the endpoint is at 1, negative 14. But I'm not just going to leave it there. I'm going to check myself. What happened to my x value to get from the endpoint to the midpoint? It went up 2. So it only makes sense if this is the midpoint, it splits it in half, that I go up 2 to get to my x, which I did. It's 1. Here, I went from negative 2 to negative 8. That goes down 6. If I go down 6 more, I get to negative 14, which is what I got for an answer. Go ahead and pause me and try B on your own. Then when you're done, unpause me and check yourself. I'm going to go through it. So when you're done, we're going to check. So same picture. So I'm going to take my endpoint x, 2, plus I don't know my other point. Right now it's xy. So I'm going to put in x, divide by 2, but we do know the midpoint x value is negative 4. Comma, y's, negative 5, plus we don't know the other y value. All that over 2 will equal negative 4 also. Multiply by 2 on both sides, so I get 11 plus x equals negative 8. Subtract 11, I get x equals negative 19. Multiply by 2 on both sides, so I get negative 5 plus y equals negative 8. I'm going to add 5, and y equals negative 3. So this point is at negative 19, negative 3. Put a box there on this. All right, one more question. Given AB with midpoint M, so let's draw that before we go on any further. Here's A, here's B. We know that this is midpoint M. We know that this is equal to this since it's a midpoint. A to M is x squared plus x plus 20. M to B is x squared plus 5x minus 4. What's the length of A to B? All right, all you're doing is finding this. This kind of goes back to segment addition postulate. So we're just going to add this piece plus this piece to get the total piece. So I'm going to add x squared plus x squared. If I have this x squared and I add another x squared together, I have how many x squared? I have 2. So 2x squared. I have an x and a 5x, so 1x plus 5x gives me 6x. And then 20 minus 4 gives me plus 16. And that is the length. We don't know what it's equal to, so you cannot solve for x, so that is your actual length of A to B. Let me just make sure. Yep. All right, that is all of 1.3. You can go ahead and work on that homework now. See you guys.